Sleep on the couch, or better yet, just get a hotel room. That's what Sandra said to me. In my kitchen. In the house I built with my own hands. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her. Then I looked at my son Neil, sitting right there at the table, staring at his eggs like they were the most interesting thing he'd ever seen. He didn't open his mouth. That was the moment I knew exactly how this was going to go. Not the moment I got angry. The moment I got quiet. My name is Gary Nolan. I'm 67 years old. I spent 38 years as a civil engineer before I retired, and the one thing that job drilled into me, above everything else, was this. Measure twice, cut once, don't react. Assess, document, then act. They were about to find out I still remembered how. Let me back up 2 days. I'd been up north visiting an old friend, Phil. We'd worked together for years before he moved away, and we try to get together a couple times a year. 2 days of grilling, watching football, talking the way guys our age do when there's nothing left to prove. It was a good trip. I drove home feeling fine. I turned onto my street and saw the truck. White rental truck, boxy, parked dead in the middle of my driveway, blocking the garage completely. I had to pull over to the curb just to stop. I sat there for a second, engine running, staring at it. My first thought was that Neil had borrowed it for something. He and Sandra had been living with me for 3 years, rent-free. I figured maybe they were rearranging furniture or hauling something out. I walked in through the front door and understood immediately that I was wrong. My living room looked like a storage warehouse, cardboard boxes stacked chest-high against the walls I had painted myself. My furniture, the sectional, the oak side table, the floor lamp my wife picked out, all shoved sideways like they were in the way. And standing in the middle of it all were 2 people treating my house like it already belonged to them. The man was Earl Briggs, Sandra's father, somewhere around 65, broad-shouldered, in a faded polo shirt tucked into jeans. He had the posture of someone who expected to be the most important person in any room he walked into. He was directing the whole operation, pointing and calling out instructions to nobody in particular. Carol Briggs, Sandra's mother, was already in my kitchen. I could hear cabinet doors opening and closing. She had that air about her, the kind that says she's already decided how things should be arranged and is just getting started. Sandra came out from the hallway. She wiped her hands on her jeans, saw me standing in my own doorway, and said, "Oh, you're back." I asked what was going on. She tilted her head slightly. Over 3 years, I'd learned that meant she was about to say something she knew I wouldn't like. My parents sold their place. They need somewhere to stay for a few months while the new condo deal closes. It'll be fine. We're all family. I turned to look at Neil. He was carrying a box labeled Kitchen in black marker, and he would not meet my eyes. I asked him directly. He set the box down with a thud and said that Sandra's parents needed help, and things had moved fast, and he figured I'd understand. When I pointed out that no one had asked me, not a phone call, not a text, nothing, he said quietly, still looking at the floor, "It's our house too, Dad. Sandra and I live here. We make decisions together." They lived there because I allowed it. No rent, no lease, no timeline. 3 years of generosity that had apparently been mistaken for surrender. I didn't argue. I went to my bedroom, closed the door, and sat down. The next 3 days were a slow, steady invasion. Earl settled into my recliner the first evening, the chair I'd sat in every night for 9 years, and announced that it felt old, and I should probably think about replacing it. Carol rearranged every cabinet in my kitchen by the end of day 1. My wife's hand-painted clock, she did it herself in 1998, hung it above the dining room doorway, got blocked by a coat rack they leaned against the wall underneath it. I'd look up, and half of it would be hidden behind their jackets. The thermostat was adjusted 6 times in 3 days. Earl touched it every time he walked past. My parking spot in the driveway disappeared every morning under his truck. My leftovers, pasta I'd made Monday, portioned out for 2 more meals, vanished from the fridge by Tuesday night. When I mentioned it, Earl said it was good, and I should make more. I kept track of all of it. Dates, times, specifics. 38 years of engineering doesn't leave you. You notice details. You document. You build a file without even thinking about it. By Wednesday night, the file in my head was getting heavy. Then came Thursday morning, and the conversation that changed everything. Thursday morning, I came downstairs at 6:30 and found all four of them already sitting at the kitchen table. That was wrong immediately. Neil and Sandra never got up before 7:30. Earl usually slept past 8. Carol complained about morning light. But here they were, coffee made, toast on the plates, everyone seated and waiting. They had been waiting for me. Sandra sat with her back straight, hands folded on the table. Business posture. Earl leaned back in his chair like a man about to deliver a verdict. Carol picked at her toast without eating. Neil studied his eggs. Sandra started talking. Her voice was calm, measured, the way you talk to someone you've already decided won't like what you're about to say. She laid it out clean. 5 adults in one house wasn't working. Space was tight. Space. Her parents needed more room. The master bedroom was the obvious solution. I set my coffee mug down slowly. She kept going. I could sleep on the couch for a few weeks. Or honestly, and here she paused just slightly, a hotel might be more comfortable for everyone. I looked at her for a moment. Then I said, "You're asking me to leave my bedroom, in my own house." Sandra's expression didn't change. She said it wasn't just my house, that Neil lived there too, that they were trying to make things work for everyone. Before I could respond, Earl leaned forward. "Let's be realistic here. You're retired. You've got time and flexibility. The rest of us have jobs, responsibilities. It just makes sense for you to find somewhere else temporarily." He shrugged. "Maybe permanently, if we can come to some arrangement." An arrangement? For my house? I turned to Neil. He was the only person at that table who mattered to me. The only one whose words could have changed what happened next. I asked him directly, "Do you want me to leave, son?" He raised his eyes for just a second. Then he went back to his eggs. "It's not that simple, Dad. Sandra's parents need help. We're just trying to figure it out." I didn't ask again. I stood up. My chair scraped the tile floor, loud in the silence. I walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs. Behind me, I heard Earl say something low that included the words, "Stubborn old man." I kept walking. 90 minutes later, I came back down with a rolling suitcase, a box of documents, and my laptop bag. They had moved to the living room. Neil was standing by the window. Sandra sat on the couch next to her mother. Earl was in my recliner. Sandra saw the suitcase first. She asked if I was really leaving. I told her she'd said to. I was leaving. Neil stepped forward, said we could talk about this, said to wait. I told him we'd had chances to talk. He'd had one that morning and he chose silence. That was also a decision. I walked out and closed the door behind me. Not a slam. Just final. The Sunrise Budget Motel sat on a busy road about 12 minutes from the house. 2 stories of sand-colored stucco, exterior corridor, nothing special. But it was clean, and it was quiet, and most importantly, it was a space no one had invaded. The woman at the front desk, her name tag said Donna, looked at my face when I walked in and didn't ask unnecessary questions. She put me in room 214, said it had a good desk, looked like I needed space to think. That was the first decent thing anyone had done for me in 4 days. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and old carpet. I put my suitcase by the closet and carried the document box to the desk. I spread everything out. The deed to the house, my name, no one else's, sole owner since 1991. Mortgage payoff confirmation from 2019. Property tax records going back to 2008. 17 years of payments, everyone made from my account, never late, until the day I paid the whole thing off. That house was mine in every way the law recognized. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up my email archive. May 2022. Neil had needed $28,000, a car for his new job, the dealership requiring a substantial down payment. His email was right there in my inbox, exactly as he wrote it. "Dad, this is a loan, not a gift. I'll pay you back $1,000 a month starting next month. You have my word." I had transferred the money that same afternoon. I pulled up 3 years of bank statements and went through every line. Not one repayment, not a single dollar returned in 36 months. I opened a fresh notebook, the kind I used to carry on job sites, and started writing. Dates, amounts, incidents, the thermostat changes, the parking spot, the food, the clock. Every small violation logged with the time and the details. Then I searched. Homeowner rights, guest versus tenant, eviction notice requirements, state property law. The hours moved. The instant coffee from the room's little machine went cold. Headlights from the road outside swept across the curtains every few minutes. I kept reading. By midnight, the notepad had 4 pages of notes. The law was not complicated once you understood it. Earl and Carol Briggs had no lease, no rental agreement, no legal standing. They were guests. I had invited no one. Permission could be revoked. 30 days' notice was required, not as a courtesy, but as a legal step before formal eviction proceedings. I leaned back in the desk chair and looked at everything in front of me. The deed, the loan records, the legal notes, the list of violations. They had assumed I was weak because I was older, because I lived alone, because I'd stayed calm instead of exploding. They had mistaken patience for powerlessness. That was going to cost them. I opened a fresh page in the notebook and wrote 2 words at the top. Step 1. Betty Lawson's office was on the 2nd floor of a restored building downtown. She was in her late 40s, gray hair pulled back, and she had the kind of eyes that sized up a situation in about 10 seconds. I handed her the 2-page summary I'd prepared, dates, names, incidents in order, and she read it without interrupting. When she finished, she looked up and said, "Most clients come in here emotional and disorganized. You've done half my job already." I told her 38 years of engineering will do that. She pulled out a copy of the state statutes and walked me through the relevant sections. The law was clear. My name was on the deed. No one else's. Earl and Carol Briggs had no lease, no rental agreement, no legal claim to occupy the property. They were guests. I could revoke that status. 30 days written notice, properly notarized, delivered to the premises. After that, if they remained, we filed for formal eviction through the courts. I asked about Neil and Sandra. She paused, said they were trickier because of the length of stay, but the core fact didn't change. Living somewhere does not transfer ownership. Neil was an adult child living rent-free in his father's home. He had no lease. He had never paid rent. The law drew a clear line between a tenant and a guest, and he sat firmly on the guest side of it. She drafted the notice while I waited. It came off the printer on firm letterhead, bold headers, legal citations, the kind of document that doesn't leave room for interpretation. We walked down the hall to get it notarized. The notary, a careful man named Dale Ashworth, reviewed every line before he pressed his seal. He handed it back and said, "They'll have no recourse on this." Then he looked at me and added, "Be ready for how they react. Document any damage. If they threaten you, call the police immediately." I told him I'd known my son for 37 years. He said he had no doubt, but that Earl Briggs was a different matter. Desperate people surprise you. I took the warning seriously. 8 days after they pushed me out, I went back. I had timed it carefully. Neil and Sandra left for work every morning around 8. Nancy Ingram, my neighbor 2 doors down, had been keeping an eye on things without me asking her to. She confirmed their car was gone by 8:15. Earl and Carol followed a predictable routine. Morning walk at 9:30, back by 11:30. I had a 2-hour window. My key still worked. They hadn't thought to change the locks. That told me everything about how seriously they'd taken me. Glenn Parrish arrived 20 minutes after I did. Licensed locksmith, mid-40s, tool belt that had seen years of real use. I showed him the deed. He looked at it, nodded, and got to work without another word. Commercial-grade deadbolts on every exterior door, front, back, side garage entry. Main garage. He told me short of breaking a window, nobody was getting in without a key. I took 6 copies. While Glenn worked, I walked through the house with my phone camera, documenting everything. Earl's clothes were hanging in my closet, shoved my things into a corner, Rose-pattern bedding on my bed that I had never bought. In the garage workshop, the space where I'd spent 15 years building things, fixing things, thinking, Earl had been through my tools. A socket set left open on the bench. A hand plane moved from its proper spot. Small things. Disrespectful things. Above the dining room doorway, my wife's clock was still half hidden behind the coat rack they'd leaned against the wall. I moved the rack aside and looked at it for a moment. She'd painted it herself the summer of 1998. Nothing fancy, just careful brushwork on a plain wooden face. I straightened it and left it where it belonged. I mounted 2 wireless security cameras, one over the front door, one over the back. Both synced to my phone in under 10 minutes. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I taped the eviction notice to the front door at eye level, centered, impossible to miss. I photographed it in place with a timestamp. Then I went inside, made coffee in my kitchen, sat in my recliner, and set the thermostat to 72. At 5:47, my phone showed Sandra's car pulling into the driveway. I watched on the camera feed as she walked up to the door and tried her key. She tried it again, tried the handle. Stood there for a moment, staring at the lock like it had made a personal decision against her. My phone rang 30 seconds later. "What did you do? My key doesn't work." I told her I'd changed the locks. It was my house. "You can't do this. We live here. You can't just lock us out." I told her there was a notarized eviction notice on the front door. It explained everything. Any further questions should go to my attorney, Betty Lawson. I gave her the number. She was still talking when I ended the call. 4 days later, a piece of mail arrived that I hadn't expected. It was from a property management company called Greenfield Rentals. The envelope was addressed to Earl Briggs, at my address. Inside was a monthly rental income statement. Earl's name listed as property owner. A tenant's payment of $1,200 received for the previous month. I read it twice. Earl Briggs owned a rental property. He was collecting $1,200 a month from a tenant living in his old house. The house he had supposedly sold. The house that had supposedly forced him and Carol to need somewhere to live. They hadn't sold anything. They had no housing crisis. No emergency. No legitimate reason to be standing in my living room directing traffic with my furniture shoved against the walls. They had wanted to bank $1,200 a month while living for free in my house. I set the letter down on the desk, next to the deed, next to the loan records, next to Betty's eviction notice. Then I picked up the phone and called Betty. "Add this to the file," I said. "I think we're going to need it." Betty used the rental income letter as a hammer. When Earl's attorney challenged the eviction, arguing his clients had no other housing available, Betty submitted the Greenfield Rentals statement as Exhibit 1. Monthly income of $1,200. Earl Briggs listed as property owner. Tenant payment confirmed for February, March, and April. The challenge was withdrawn within 48 hours. Betty called to tell me. I asked how long it took their attorney to figure out he had no case. She said about 2 days of research. I told her he learned fast. She said some people do when it costs them by the hour. The eviction stood. Earl and Carol had 30 days to vacate, and they knew fighting it further would only cost them more money they apparently preferred to keep. 3 days after the eviction was confirmed, Betty and I filed a second case. Gary Nolan versus Neil Nolan. Civil claim for unpaid loan. $28,000 principal, loaned May 15th, 2022. Interest at 5% per annum per state contract law. Calculated over 3 years, $4,200. Total claim, $32,200. The process server found Neil at work mid-afternoon, delivered the envelope to him in front of his coworkers. Nancy heard about it through her daughter, who heard it from someone at Neil's workplace. He left early that day. He called me that night. His voice had that hollowed-out quality of someone who hasn't slept. "Dad, you're suing me. Your own son." I told him I was collecting a debt. He had borrowed $28,000. He had promised to repay it. He hadn't paid a single dollar in 36 months. He said he was going to pay me back eventually, that I knew he was good for it. I told him eventually wasn't a payment schedule. It was an excuse. He asked how he was supposed to come up with $32,200. I told him he'd managed to find $28,000 when he needed it. He could figure out the rest. I ended the call. The hearing took place on a Tuesday morning. I arrived with Betty and a binder organized the way I used to organize project submittals. Every document numbered, tabbed, hole-punched. Bank transfer confirmation. Neil's original email. 3 years of statements showing 0 repayments. Interest calculation with the formula shown. Neil sat across the aisle with his attorney. Sandra was in the gallery, arms crossed, not looking at me. Judge Shirley Medina reviewed the file without rushing. She asked Neil if he had borrowed $28,000 from his father. He said yes. She held up the email printout and read the relevant line aloud. Asked if that language was his. He said yes. Asked if he had made any payments toward the debt in 3 years. He said no. She entered judgment for $32,200, payable in monthly installments of $1,400 over 24 months. Wage garnishment authorized if payments were missed. The gavel came down. Neil stared at the table. Sandra walked out without a word. My neighbor Roy Whitfield was in his driveway when I pulled in that afternoon. He looked at my face and didn't ask questions. Just went inside and came back with 2 cold beers. We stood in the garage, his garage, the one that smells like motor oil and sawdust the way a garage should. And he said, "I heard the Briggs fellow had his mail forwarded here. Probably thought he'd be staying a while." I told Roy what the letter had contained. The rental income, the whole story. Roy was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "So they weren't in trouble at all?" "No. They just saw an opening and took it." Roy nodded slowly. "Well, they picked the wrong house." 2 weeks after the judgment, Floyd Mercer came by to do the property appraisal. He was methodical, thorough, took photographs of everything. The gouge along the side of my dining table, solid oak, my wife and I bought it in 1997, was deep enough that he said no repair would fully restore it. The workshop floor had 2 cracked tiles from something heavy being dropped. A window latch was bent. The bathroom fill valve was damaged and had been running constantly, which explained a water bill that had jumped $40. His final report totaled $6,800. I had time-stamped photographs of every surface taken before Earl and Carol arrived, pulled from my cloud backup. Before and after. No ambiguity. Earl received the demand letter by certified mail. He called me the same day. His voice had the particular anger of a man who expected to get away with something and didn't. He said it was harassment. Said he wasn't paying a cent. Said I wouldn't win. I reminded him I hadn't lost yet. Then I told him to expect to hear from Betty. Small claims court. 3 weeks later, Earl showed up without an attorney this time. Judge Medina asked him if he had any documentation showing the damages existed before his occupancy. He said he hadn't thought to take photographs. "Mr. Briggs," she said, "Mr. Nolan has dated photographic evidence, a professional appraisal, and 2 neighbor statements. You have told me you have nothing. That is not a defense." Judgment for $6,800 plus court costs. Earl sold his truck to pay it. By August, the payments were coming in on schedule. Neil's 5th installment arrived on the 3rd, $1,400, transferred quietly and on time. A letter came with it. 1 page, handwritten. He said he understood now what he'd done wrong. That he should have stood up at that table, that he was paying the price, literally and in other ways. Sandra had filed for divorce in July. He said he wasn't asking for anything, just that he hoped someday I might be willing to talk. I read it twice. Folded it. Put it in my desk drawer. Someday, maybe. Not because he asked. When I decide it's time. That evening I sat out on the back porch. The August heat had backed off enough to make it comfortable. Roy came by, leaned on the fence, and we talked for a while about nothing in particular. His truck, the weather, a project he had going in his garage. Normal conversation. The kind you have when things are the way they're supposed to be. After he left, I sat there a while longer, coffee going cool in my hand. The house behind me was quiet. My locks, my thermostat, my clock on the wall above the dining room doorway, exactly where it belonged. They thought retirement made me slow. thought my patience meant I had nothing left. Generosity isn't weakness, but when someone mistakes it for weakness, the kindest thing you can do is prove them wrong. They came into my house thinking I had nothing left to fight for. They left understanding that a man who built something with his own hands will always find a way to take it back. 38 years of engineering. Measure twice, cut once. I measured, then I cut, and I didn't miss.